Hey, Brandon,
Hey, Alan.
and welcome to Dice Over Everything, the miniatures gaming podcast.
All right, so as we're recording this, you're about to head off to Gen Con, and I'm just thinking, like, how much stuff are you going to bring with you to Gen Con? Not like back from Gen Con. There's no question you're going to bring back from Gen Con, but how much do you bring to Gen Con?
Man, I have not...
Like what sort of suitcase size? Like
Well,
little carry-on size? Like
clothes. And I always bring extra underwear just in case.
Well, like you have multiple locations.
Me,
you keep one in your main bag, and you have like a side bag with extra underwear just in case, like on hand in case something goes wrong.
I just double wear underwear so that I have some more on the way.
Okay, we didn't need to know that much information. It's not.
No. In general, I try to pack pretty light, and this time for Gen Con, I have not actually signed up for as big events. Like I'm not going to play War Machine or any of these things that require a huge box. So I'm just bringing my Arena Rec stuff, which is one kind of box.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the room is space for whatever I buy there.
Oh, okay. That's legit. I don't know. I find when we went to Adepticon, I'm like, I will bring 2 pairs of pants and then a bunch of clothing and then the miniatures for that game. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's not bringing much stuff.
Do you ever bring like something to help pass the time normally when you travel? Like, say, a deck of cards or something? Or is it like with all of your miniatures stuff, you're like, oh, we could just play miniatures? Although you can't, because miniatures require you to, set up a table to be able to do that.
You're reminding me of like doing things in the pre-internet era. This is really throwing me off. Like, wait, we did bring cards around before the internet was everywhere. Weird, yeah.
Yeah, but now I just bring Coup as a card for cards.
Coup,
the game. It's so good. No, it replaces card games for me.
Are you only playing with nerds though?
No.
Oh, okay. Everyone can get into Coup.
Yeah, it's easy enough. Actually, a lot of the times people who are not nerds are a lot better because it's a line game.
True. And all the rules are on the cards, basically, aren't they?
I'm not saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying that nerds are bad at lying, or that non-nerds are like a bunch of liars. But I am kind of saying that because I feel like nerds they don't have as well training in being able to, do that whole communication things where you talk to someone and you keep what you're thinking inside. Like whenever I'm at work, if I find something that is like not good when someone says something, like my brow furrows, and apparently it's pretty obvious.
So now you just keep the camera off at work so nobody can see you?
Yes. There's just a giant silence. That's when they know I disapprove of whatever action we're taking. How about you?
I make sure they know I disapprove. It's key. It's key at work. It's key that people know that there can be consequences.
That's part of the good communication.
Anyhow, on the note of communicating things in games and cards, can we jam those two things together to form a topic?
Sure. Let's talk about how to use cards and how cards are used in war games. And we will communicate about it.
And people will be angry and furrow their brows at our take.
I will, definitely, probably.
All right. I don't know. Should we just go over some ways they could get used and maybe go into the games, or should we just go into the way and then dive deeper right away? I don't know. What are you thinking?
If you have a set of
methods,
ways that they could be used, let's go over those first, and then we'll deep dive afterwards. All
right, sure. I think let's go back to the basic, right back to the card game style thing. Just thinking of Big Two, thinking of poker, the higher numbers are better, and it's just an outcome. So I see them being an option for randomizing, whether it be replacing a dice roll, whether it being causing events. It can basically be used for randomizing.
For
you
sure.
can have different things on different cards, so it randomizes.
So it's basically like a replacement for dice in many ways.
I'm not going to say we'll comment on whether we like it or not later, but you could use them to replace dice, and they don't have to have like sequential numbers. They could have weird numbers, but again, dice can have weird numbers too. So I guess that's not necessary. The other like most basic way I think of is just having a stat card for your unit, as opposed to going through a book. You could just have info on the cards, so you don't have to like read through as much to look stuff up. So I guess there's the stat card way.
It's really easy to assemble an army. At least that's what they tell you. And actually it was when we played War Machine.
Yeah, it was. Who knows where that's gone. Other way, which is kind of down the randomization thing, it's kind of like stats and randomization, is just having hidden objectives, like hidden information. So as opposed to having to like write things down or like hide dice, you draw a card.
Or just keep it in your mind and hope your opponent wasn't lying.
Yeah, exactly. Hope they trust you. You're like you can keep some like hidden information on
and
the
hope
card.
You don't forget which one you chose. Halfway through, you're like, oh, which objective did I choose again? Oh crap!
You can go back and look at it.
Yeah, that's why you need the card.
When you have like that sad face when you look at it, your opponent doesn't necessarily know you're screwed. When you look at it again after you've forgotten, but they
when
probably
my brow furrows, exactly. I'm like,
The other way is like sometimes you have resources that instead of being for your own use, let's say you could possibly trade them in between players during the game. Okay. So it becomes more like a playing card game almost. Not like Magic, but like where you actually trade resources.
Like Settlers of Catan.
Yes.
You're like, I'm using my sheep, and I'll trade you for some wood powers. I got it.
Yeah. I only have a few games in mind for that, but we'll get to that later. Sure. And I don't know. I think I covered all the ones.
I covered the main ones. The other things that I've listed here are kind of variations on those, so we can talk about them.
They're a subset.
As a subset. But let's start from
Do you want stat cards?
Top, I guess.
Stat cards is almost like the most obvious, isn't it? Or is the dice the most obvious?
Well, the first one you mentioned was the dice. So let's do it from the dice.
That's the pretty most basic way. So I mostly think of that from
Malafox?
Malafox, yes. Malafox. Because we've played that and it straight up uses like regular playing cards. So it's just basically a dice outcome. And the one thing that it sort of does differently than dice is that once you start using up the cards, now the randomness starts going away. So maybe you get some high rolls or high outcomes sometimes, and then later you get lower outcomes. And then also just like sometimes you have dice that have symbols on them and that. If they have suits on them, you don't necessarily they can produce different secondary outcomes too. I'm trying to think of other games that have weirder stat cards, because you could put way more info if you had your own custom deck for your game. You could have way more. You could have like 8 different suits in the hand if you wanted to, or you could not go sequentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 up to like a regular D6. You could make it in different increments. You could have some occur at higher frequencies.
That's true. You could make part of the game based on based on your army building. You could have more cards or something like that. Like, if I take this one unit, I get a second king or something like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking board games do this all the time, where they have resources on your cards. Miniature games, like we've also seen Frostgrave, or more specifically Rangers of Shadow Deep, where like to have outcomes happen is more of a narrative thing. That you want like one thing of the narrative to happen, and then you don't want it to happen again. You need something to happen differently. Having cards means you're using up the random outcomes so that like you don't have the same thing happen over and over again, rather than just telling the player, oh, you rolled that, just re-roll. Oh, you rolled another outcome you already rolled, re-roll again. It throws re-rolls, I find, often throw you out of the game. So cards for like for non-recurring outcomes can be a really good thing to use.
Yeah, so in Rangers of Shadow Deep, basically sometimes there's an event at at the end of every turn there's an event, and sometimes the events are very important. Like, you're hunting a wolf, and the wolf is only going to be revealed when you flip up a 5, right? Yep. But then once the wolf is revealed, you don't, like, if it was a dice, it's like whatever, roll a 6. But then if it's a dice, if you keep on rolling sixes, after your wolf has showed up, it's a little bit weird, right?
And you have to keep track of it too. It's a nuisance to have to write it all down, as opposed
to
the cards
nice to have those different things. And then
down.
with Malifaux, they kind of folded that into the way that the game plays, because there's higher cards are better, and you're also looking for certain suits to trigger abilities, like you were saying, right?
Yep.
Because each suit, when you try to flip a card up, you need to beat your opponent, but you also need to have a certain suit to get like an extra effect if you win. So you're basically looking for both of those things to happen, and it creates a very interesting kind of tension, especially when you start counting the cards and you're like, well, I've seen all of my high. So if you look at your opponent, right, and they're looking for a spade, but they've already used their queen, king, and ace. Now you know a little bit about what they're going to play and the odds of their success, and you can plan your reactions accordingly, because that they're not necessarily going to get a high hit while also getting that suit, right? So that kind of thing can really make things interesting.
Yeah, it kind of introduces a level of skill, like counting cards in poker or whatever.
Yeah.
Where
now,
you've got your.
Do you want that though, right? Because sometimes if you have too much prediction, like what are you actually modeling, right? Like often one of the fun things about miniature gaming is that you model the chaos in a battlefield, but when you start running out of cards and you start knowing what the outcomes are going to be, it feels very much more contrived and less about modeling the world and more about just playing a game, right? It could be very fun in a gamey kind of way, but it's not necessarily, it might lose some of that aspect of real life.
You're right. It does feel like the game becomes gamified. And in miniatures, you want I want a simulation. I don't want like gamification. If I loved gamification, I guess I'd just be a board gamer. So
it's true. Yeah, there's definitely a heavy importance in that. And so for those two things, I feel like when you're using a card, there's two things you can do to mitigate that, right? The thing in Malifaux, part of what they do is story wise, they solve the issue with a story, like putting in story beats to explain it away, because basically in Malifaux they're all trying to collect these soul stones, and soul stones allow the bearers of the soul stones to control fate, right? Change reality. And so there's some sort of already kind of controlling and playing with fate in these stories, so it kind of helps the atmosphere of the game when you can also play with those kind of things, see fate happening. And also important part of the game is that you can cheat dice, right? And of course you can do cheating dice if you roll dice, if you pre-roll dice and swap them in, but with Malifaux that's part of the thing, right? Cheating fate, playing fate. And so the prediction thing is less egregious in Malifaux than it would be if you're playing, let's say, a World War II game, right?
Yeah.
Where like, how are you knowing what's going to happen? That's like totally anathema to like a historical kind of play.
Okay, that's an interesting way of thinking when you can use that rule, not use the rule, or use that mechanism.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention is reshuffling. So in Malifaux, right, every single turn you end up reshuffling the deck to reset the odds, you could say, right, in the counting, and that can be finding the balance of reshuffling and not when you want to maintain this kind of randomness and unpredictability is, I think, a very important part of these type of games, right? Like with Malifaux, because they have that kind of atmosphere, they want you to go through enough of your deck before you shuffle that you start being able to predict what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But they don't want it to be so much that you know exactly, because it is still a miniatures game, right? And they like that kind of thing. So just that kind of balance is an important thing. But if there's too much reshuffling, right? If you have to shuffle after every single drawn card to keep it like fully random, like a dice, it can often be too much shuffling. Then you're spending like half your game just shuffling. So it is an interesting kind of dynamic of when to do it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I think not too many games I can think of use like the cards as a resource in miniatures.
Like as a like in Malifaux, like when you have cards and you can flip them out and cheat them.
Yeah, it's
like randomly kind of.
Yeah, as a randomizer. Yeah.
As a randomizer that is also a resource. Yeah, I think Malifaux is relatively unique in that way. There's a couple that do the other things we mentioned, like use cards as a resource, but not in a randomized way, but in a kind of more of a strategic kind of way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think actually the game that we're working on, Blood of Stars, right? We do actually have some sort of randomness, but it's a little bit more like the other ones we're going to talk about. So still using randomness, but not quite in the totally kind of random manipulating randomness that cards can do. That at least as heavily as Malifaux.
Yeah. All right. So do we want to move on to the next big way cards get used in miniature games?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, stat cards. I know I like stat cards. I don't play that many games with stat cards, but I like the stat cards, honestly.
You know what I like about stat cards?
Mm-hmm.
They're almost like collectibles. Like, okay, so when I was young, let's go back to our youth, because like all games go back to my youth. I must be like trying to relive that. That's why I love these kind of games. But like when I was young, I loved collecting cards. Not baseball and hockey cards, because I thought those were boring. But I still collected them a little bit. But Marvel cards. Do you remember these things? They're like art cards, basically.
I thought there was a game behind them. Wasn't there?
There was no game.
Oh.
There was no game. This was It started off pre-Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
So I started like 89 or something like that. I think Magic came out in 91, 92 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was like 6 or 7, right, we would go to the store, maybe pick up some baseball or hockey cards. And then when they had the Marvel cards, which had like Marvel characters on them, that was it, man. I didn't care about the baseball and hockey. Like I wanted my real heroes, like Spider-Man and the Hulk.
Mm-hmm.
Not Wayne Gretzky. Who cares about that guy?
I feel like you're going to collect them all pretty quickly in the old Marvel days.
Remember, I was 6 or 7. I didn't have enough money to.
Yeah, you could get 3 packs in your. You got 3 packs ever, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But it was so fun to be able to look at them and see that art and like envision it, right? And when you pick up that card, the visual thing, and oftentimes when they have the art, that to me is one of the selling things that really helped me feel like, I don't know, like you're collecting something. It's fun.
Yeah, you're right. That part of the cards is actually, I wasn't even thinking of that before, that the cards can give you, like, they can give you art, they can give you fluff on the thing, as opposed to like having to read the book. It's right there in front of you. I mean, usually they don't take up too much space with that, but at least it can give you some sort of feel of what the character is. Yeah, I forget. I'm just thinking, if you don't think mechanically, like.
And I gotta say, like, not like I wanted to just make this podcast all about how lovely Malifaux is and how great it is, but the Malifaux art cards, the Malifaux cards are really good looking. Relative, like when you think about War Machine cards, and maybe I should have pulled these up. I'll go get them in a second. But the War Machine ones are so ugly. There's like a tiny picture this big, and the rest of the cards is just stats.
There's a little tiny circle with the guy, yeah.
And then there was recently released like giant cards this big for Warhammer 10th edition. Like
index cards?
They're bigger than tarot cards. Yeah, they're index cards.
Yep.
And those are also not pretty, which is stupid because I think they're
huge.
Like
they should
Space Marines. Warhammer 40,000 art is so good. Imagine if the back of those cards was just a giant spread of beautiful art of that character. That would be nice. Technically, I haven't bought them, so maybe those exist, and I will say, if they do have that, I will probably go out and buy some orc cards.
Yeah, I've never seen people turn them over when they play at the store, so I would never know.
Man,
but yeah,
cards. If they do have that, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, you think you would have heard of that, but anyway.
You got to talk about stat cards. I'm going to go fetch some.
What?
I'm going to go fetch my Malifaux cards while you talk more about stat cards.
Oh, okay, sure. So, I don't know, I'll go for the pros of the stat card first. It means that like you don't have to flip through the book in the middle of the game, which is a huge plus, because you may end up having like a dozen, maybe more than a dozen units available in your army, and just going through, and especially when you're learning the game, having to flip to them all, or if you just have a game where the dudes have tons of stats, because we play Infinity, and the guys have tons of stats that are different by like little minute amounts, and often you've got equipment too. So just having all that info right in front of you without having to flip through a book and slow the pace of your game down is amazing.
Yep. So this is kind of cool. So this is a BattleTech card. It's mostly stats, but it does have the art, a little piece of art here, and it is the full mech, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is like they instead though of the back, instead of putting a giant picture, they just have another card. So they're doubling up. So then they have two different like variants basically of the same guy, and so that allows you to. And it makes it very easy to build armies, right? Like, so you just look at them, you kind of flip them over, just find out which ones, then you lay them all out. Exactly like what you're saying.
Yeah, the one downside I find about the stat cards is often they put the point values on them. And then if they have to make modifications to the game, they're usually screwed and they're really reluctant to change those things. So the downside I see with stat cards is that often they become outdated and the company's reluctant to put out FAQs because now they've ruined your cards. But I think a lot of the companies that have done that have now moved to just being like, yeah, we'll include the card, but also we'll put the free version online so that in case we ever change anything or have to correct things, that you can at least like keep the game up to date. So I think a lot of Malifaux you can download now too, can't you?
Yep.
Yeah.
So the issue is that the cards are beautiful and I don't know, I guess contrary to some people's belief, cards are kind of expensive to print, right? Yeah. Especially when you're talking about miniature games where you often have a lot of different types of cards, so you don't get as much bulk orders. It just is expensive to print new cards. And when you want to make it cheap, you have to print them in bulk. But are people going to buy like a bulk version of cards when, you know, the way that miniatures are is that they are very modular in terms of their collections, right?
Yeah.
So that means that you're not going to want to buy like the cards for an entire faction when what you actually have is 3 of one guy instead of having like 1 of every single guy in the faction. You have 3 of one guy, 2 of another, 7 of another guy, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to collect the right numbers.
Yeah. So you know what game this makes me think of? X-Wing.
Oh,
how they could do it wrong. It's like, oh, well, now you can buy this thing to upgrade to modernize your army to the new rules. It's like, but I was playing this SKU army and now I have to buy 2 of these packs. Like they're not letting you do what you want to do. And if they screwed up those cards with point values or had to update them, now what are they supposed to do? So
the sticker shock was crazy because people thought they were paying all that money for each vehicle, right? Each model for the specific model.
When they bought probably it in the first edition,
half the cost of every single model was all of the paper in that thing. Probably more than half the cost actually is plastic. They were a little bit more expensive because they're pre-painted than, let's say, other ones because it's not just injected, right? And pre-painted and assembled. So, but at the same time, there was a lot of cardboard and paper in it.
Oh, you're talking about the starter set. I'm talking about one that moved from first to
No, each box. Each box is expensive. So what I'm saying is when they moved from first edition to second edition, they had the upgrade kits you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
But people had sticker shock because they were so expensive. But they were so expensive because it had a lot of cardboard in it.
There was a lot of cards in. Yeah, there's a lot of material in there.
Of cards.
Oh, because it was beyond. Yeah, because it was beyond just the cards. They had things that go the base covers with more stats on them. Yeah.
Yep. Dials and covers. There's a lot of stuff. Like there's it was a lot of sticker shock because people thought they were buying miniatures when half of what they were buying was the card stock.
Yeah.
And you're kind of throwing halfway that away, which means you have to pay for half of the card stock. They probably didn't even make money on that card stuff.
No, I'm trying to think because like X-Wing having the cards is great for building your armies because the armies aren't that big. Like the other thing about the stat cards is I think if you have a really big army where things repeat a lot of times, or like you can change unit sizes, stat cards are probably not the way to go on a game like that. But when you've got individual, like you have a small number of a bunch of individuals, not units, then I feel like the stat cards work better because like at a certain number of units,
unique
units, they become a nuisance. But once you get bigger, for some reason, I feel like it stops working. Like in a Warhammer-sized game, I don't think it works anymore.
So I actually looking at these Malifaux cards. There's actually a lot of text. So this is a Malifaux card. First of all, it's like a tarot card size, so it's really big. But
otherwise,
because
it wouldn't be readable.
Look how much text is on it. This is a master though, so it makes more sense. But there is still a giant piece of art on the top, right? Like half of one side is just a piece of art, right? This is a master; it's a little bit harder. This is just a vehicle, not a vehicle, just a unit.
Yep. So do they make the art bigger or smaller based on how many rules there are? Yes, they do. That's kind of neat.
Yep. Oh yeah, I forgot. I forgot some people are just listening. So yes, they do.
So there's no white space. Interesting. They just increase the art size to cut the white space around text. Interesting.
So these are really pretty though, right? They have Malifaux has some great art, right? Although more art is more better. I would probably buy Malifaux just like pure art cards. If they had like a what do you call it? Just like an art trading card set. I told you, right? I went to this phase. It lasted basically 3 weeks, where I was like, I want old art cards. I realized that what I really wanted, I was getting into, I think, Magic the Gathering, and I realized what I really wanted to was collect cool art, and I didn't actually care about the game.
I could ask more questions about whether you just collect miniatures not for the purpose of the game, but that'd be way off topic.
Yeah, you know the answer already anyways.
Yeah, I do. All right. So on the note, why do we think that the X-Wing stat cards didn't work so well? Is it because they just bundled them with a whole bunch of other stuff that made them super expensive? Is that what we think the point of failure was? What?
It's the upgrade cards. There's too many upgrades. If the cards were only for the units and maybe just the pilots, that would be enough mix and match. Okay. But there's way too many upgrade cards, and it made things unsustainable. And like you said, they started trying to sell you cards instead of ships and playability, right? Whereas the upgrade cards were variants to make you enjoy and make the game feel longer lasting, and the idea of charging for that and making you buy a dial and a ship that you wouldn't use was a terrible idea. But it worked for a while. They sold like crazy, right? Yeah. X-Wing became, I think it became the second game for a while, based off of people collecting those cards.
But not during second edition.
No, that was during first edition. Yeah.
Yeah,
second edition is doing okay now. It's kind of recovered and been more stable, but I don't think it's gotten it's kind of recovered to a point that is below, it's not one of the. I don't think it's one of the top 3 anymore.
Yeah, so just talking about the upgrade cards, you could have your stat cards, and I guess a second subset of the stat cards is your upgrade cards. You've got games like War Machine, I think even in Song of Ice and Fire, your attachments. Or just they have their own separate cards that get added on. So it's kind of like the stat cards, if it's based around points, usually just let you build your whole... Well, you want to build your whole army based on the cards. So if there's such thing as upgrades, those are basically cards too. So your whole army builds...
The upgrades are somewhat fine as long as there's a limited number. How many cards for when you're using them as army cards? How many cards for your army is too much, right? Because that's basically the thing, right? At some point, there's too many cards, right?
Well, it takes you a long time to get them sorted out. It would have been easier to write out an army list at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And collate them. It's obviously 60 cards or even 40 cards is too many, right? When you create a Magic the Gathering deck list, that's too many cards to sort out and make it easy to look at one time and figure out what's in your army. But something under 10 cards or even 10 cards is probably fine. Even a little bit over 10 cards might be okay.
Yeah, because
as long as it's not units.
Just think of Magic. A part of the game is the pre-game building your deck, whereas with miniatures, you're not. Yeah. List building is a thing, but having to just spend hours putting together the deck in the right way to show up to play a game, yeah, that's not what a miniature game is about. That's Magic at that point.
So how many cards do you think is good? 12 or 15? 12, 15 is probably maximum.
12 is ideal. 15, you're like, yeah. Sometimes you're playing a swarm army. You're like, yeah, okay, I need 15. It's okay. You chose to go the swarm route. So
sure, fair enough. Makes sense. All right. What was the next way that we mentioned?
Oh, I guess going for hidden objectives, basically.
Sure. All right. So hidden objectives or hidden cards, and the basic difference. Oftentimes, there might be ways that they combine that with the first one, where you might get a set of. You might not be able to choose all of the objectives. You might get 3 secret ones, and you have to choose the one that you like the most. And then the hidden part is that the ideal part of the hidden thing is, you can retain that, look at it every once in a while as a reminder, and you can, that's basically the benefit of it. And also, just like the second one, you can put a lot of the objective or the information about the thing you chose on the card. So instead of just having it be like 1, 2, or 3, it can actually say, I don't know, what's it called? Like experimental drug or
assassination to kill their leader.
Assassination, right? Exactly, right. And it can list all of those things, making it really easy for you to reference and remember those kind of things, right? A lot of this is to just reduce the cognitive load of these kind of actions that we do in games.
Yeah, I'm thinking I wish I'd played Warcry, but you've played Warcry. A lot of that is just built
Not that
on.
Much. It's been a while.
Okay, but a lot of that is like the whole setup of the mission and your objectives and your deployment are all like created out of drawing cards. So I guess, as you said, like the objectives don't necessarily have to be hidden. They could be like even your deployment is just like another. That's more of a randomizing function though, but at least it lets you keep track of it. Like it's a nice way of just you draw a random outcome, it keeps track of it for you, and it explains it all in one.
Yeah, I guess we could have talked about that with a Malifaux randomization, but yes, definitely setup cards is an interesting way to quickly get up to speed of like randomizing from a few kind of objectives together to make an interesting scenario, right? I think a couple of our friends really like in Legion the secret, the setup cards, because they take it one step further over Warcry. So you do have like I think 3 different things, right? 3 different settings. Like it's like battlefield, length of time, anyways, a bunch of objectives and stuff like that. And your opponent, I think you both get to. So there's 3 that's laid out, and each of you, the players, they like they ban one of the objectives. From each thing to get the final objective. So you draw 3, each player bans 1, so you kind of get the one at the very end that people like are the least hating, if that makes sense, right? And people like that because you get to like modify it and it feels a little bit more strategic, and you can also create armies that don't have to play to every single kind of objective, right? And then you're only playing them against other armies that can kind of play against it. You're hopefully not getting an army that is, just unable to play the objective that you end up playing.
So I think the new 40K also went for like hidden objectives as well.
Yeah, there's a hidden objective that's quite popular thing to do. I think it's like a maelstrom, or whatever. Honestly, I haven't followed this last edition of 40K that much. I almost bought the rule book, but I only wanted to buy the rule book if it was going to be a pretty coffee table book, so I didn't end up buying it.
Oh well, can't have every.
But
edition.
I do believe there's cards that they're trying to force you to buy for whatever reason. I don't know if it's the actual missions or not, or if this is just a sales tactic to get people to buy more cardboard.
Yeah, I want to go because I ended up buying the Kill Team deck so we could play Kill Team. I don't even remember what was on those cards. I think
how many times did we play that game? One more time?
thought we played it twice. It was for educational purposes, is Kill
Sure.
Team any good? And apparently
Yeah.
it's forgettable. But I knew the cards were pretty necessary to play the game. If the headphone cord was like 2 feet longer, I could probably grab them. But I'll unplug
Are you sure
myself.
you didn't leave them with me?
I left half because there were duplicates. So one is good for 2 players. So you do. Okay. I did leave some with you.
All right. I don't know where I put them. I do have a Kill Team box, so maybe it's there. Or maybe the Kill Team box is filled with other stuff. I don't know.
I thought you had a whole bunch of Kill Team boxes full of like.
I do. I don't like any of the Kill Team games. I actually prefer the original Kill Team. Mm-hmm. But yeah. But the boxes are primo. Those are nice boxes.
Yeah.
They look good on my shelf.
Honestly, a game like Kill Team doesn't really need stat cards. Look, it could have stat cards because the armies are like basically pre-built for the most part, or you have so few choices. I don't think that game even would benefit much from it because there's not that much flipping around between books to do.
But you could have really beautiful art cards.
You could, because
They're not that complicated. The Kill Team characters, you could have a beautiful art card on one side, and then you just have the stats on the other. I would love that, but I wouldn't buy it because it's Kill Team.
Yeah, I don't think they do that because they did the Kill Team like the introduction, the board game version, and I think their cards were still really basic. They had like a triangle, like a little tiny triangle with the guys in it, kind of like the War Machine having a little circle with the guy in it. It's like okay,
modern 40K like giant cards.
Yeah, it's a giant card. There's not even very much info on it. They could have made it much prettier, but alas.
It costs money though to put all that effort in to make it look good, right? Like just the graphic design to make those cards look good is a lot of effort. And if that's not your main way of selling, I know that's what I said I wanted, but that is an entirely that's a tangential thing, and they're never going to do it. It's going to cost too much money.
Yeah.
We didn't even mention though one of the things that we play every week that uses these objective cards.
Yeah, it's Infinity. Like there's some missions that are entirely based around the cards, and there's others where it can be like 1 to 3 of the cards for just extra points. Just kind of like it's usually for less killing based stuff. You're like, okay, you're doing a mission that's based around killing or controlling like the circle. Okay, you keep track of that normally. But if you want more complicated objectives, then often just having them drawn like randomly off a deck works really well.
And the Infinity cards are actually good looking. There's a lot of art on those cards. And so they're quite nice. If only
you didn't keep them face down all game, because I don't even know what's on them. They stay face down because they're hidden cards. So maybe if
you don't know Predator?
I only throw it on the table once I do it, and I don't look at it because I have to go back to killing people.
See, I must have seen it a lot because people do that to me a lot. So they throw it on the table, and I get scarred when they're like, they did the subjective.
And they do it like right away, so it just sits in front of you for the whole game.
Yeah, I love it. To me, the fact that there's a giant piece of art there is great. It makes me like the cards more, and it makes me looking forward to when they replace the old deck, buying that new deck.
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with buying a new deck. For some reason, I'd be kind of peeved off at buying like X-Wing cards, but for buying Infinity cards, I'm like, yep, sure, take my money, whatever.
There are a lot less cards, right? It's like
it's just a plain card deck size.
Yeah, it's a 52 card deck or something like that, and it's for every single army, even if you play different factions. And then on top of that, they're a lot prettier, like we said, right? So they're cheaper, prettier, nicer than the X-Wing cards, which were not that. Oh, actually, the X-Wing cards did have some sort of art on them.
Yeah, the X-Wing cards were fine.
Yeah, you're right, actually. Why did I not like them as much? Maybe I don't like vehicles as much as people duking it out.
It could be. It's all a bunch of gray ships. It's like you played.
Yeah.
You played the Imperials, so they're all just like gray. Another gray ship.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh, wow.
5 different types of TIE fighter. Just different pictures of TIE fighters flying around. Yeah. Maybe that's actually it. Maybe I would have really loved it if it was stormtroopers or something. But then it would just be 5 different pictures of the same stormtrooper running around with slightly different numbers on his shoulder or on their shoulder.
I guess the other good thing about the cards is like I don't like carrying around books for games. So if I can carry around like the deck of cards with the army on it, I'm so much happier with that. Like I want
deck of cards wiki.
All in your phone or on the cards, like anything that size to carry around in addition to your army. Because, well, I guess if you go all out and you're playing Warhammer 40k and you're going to bring like a roll-on suitcase as if you're traveling overseas for like several weeks, not just to a convention. Okay, sure, have all the resources you want. But once you're playing skirmish, like, don't give me books.
I like the books, but I want them just to be pretty art books that I can put on my table. About the fluff. Like I do like the changeover of the Infinity books where it's just fluff now basically and art and profile and text and stuff like that. I'll probably be buying, or I will at this point because this will be showed after Gen Con, I will have bought the Gen Con book.
Okay, I put in a pre-order through our store, even though I could get it sooner from sending
I'll
somebody.
buy it. Yeah, I'll buy it and we can take a look and then you can wait for your pre-order. Yeah.
Yeah. Not like I was going to do anything with it anyways for months. It's fine.
Yeah, it should be fun. Like, I'm literally probably just going to put it on my coffee table and read, like, the first 10 pages, and then that's it. Because, like, I am brain broken, and all I do is, I don't know, watch YouTube videos.
If they just put out a YouTube video, would you pay for all the content in the book if someone just sat there and read it to you?
No, YouTube has broken me, so I don't value YouTube, even though I spend all my time on it.
So you value the book you don't read, that's fine. But a YouTube video you would actually watch for the same price with the same content in the book. Somehow you're like, no way, man. No, can't
nostalgia,
do it.
I told you. It's nostalgia's a hell of the drug. I'm willing to buy the book because I get the nostalgia of when I used to read books, even though I don't read books anymore. Honestly, I'm trying to unbreak my brain and start reading again, but I just read like internet articles and stuff like that. It's terrible. Or like terrible clickbait Facebook posts or something where Facebook is trying to send me rage bait to be angry and half type a response and then realize, why am I posting angry responses on Facebook to a bunch of bots? Exactly. And then I cancel it out. But then Facebook already knows that I'm actually really engaged by this angry rage bait, so they keep on sending to me and break my brain more.
They just show me pictures of lousy construction and I find them hilarious. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, actually, if it was more about work, at least that's somewhat useful, I guess. But whatever. All right, so stat cards. Oh, sorry, that was setup cards, right? For hidden cards. Do we mention? Yeah, I guess objectives. Did we mention tactic cards?
Oh, so like abilities you pull off.
Yes.
So that is, I believe, what Kill Team did, isn't it? I believe they were tactics.
Are they tactics in Kill Team? I can't even remember, honestly. No, I
bought them. Like, I don't know what they did.
So long. It's been out for apparently a long enough period of time. I don't remember. I do remember Necromunda. The new Necromunda, that is the worst game that I've played in 10 years, had tactic cards.
It did. Yeah, I'm trying to delete most of that. But yes, it had tactics cards. It also brings us to something else, which we could get back to. But we'll stay on the tactics cards.
So although Necromunda, the new version, I did mention it was the worst experience I've had. The tactic cards, although I don't think they were implemented very well in that game, like everything was not implemented well, the idea of tactic cards I love. And there's a lot of other games that have them that I think are good, even if some of them that are from GW didn't implement them well. Like Warhammer Apocalypse, Warhammer 40k Apocalypse, the version of the game that is like has its own rules, also use tactics cards, and they're critical to the way the game plays, right? A lot of the things that you can do that might be in an army book or come from your tactics cards instead. And I thought they were a really good way to reduce the complexity and have like cool special effects, special abilities that affect things, right? But in a way that is interspersed in your game and doesn't have to be ever present, right? You can kind of just reveal a tactic card of your 10. I think you have a deck of 20, right? And so you're going through them and getting them, right? And so it helps give some flavor and feel and actually have impactful things without having it happen every single turn or having some sort of resource. And so I really liked that, except that they were implemented badly. Basically, like a lot of things in GW, they were not playtested at all. So they were unbalanced, right? Same thing with the Necromunda stuff.
So it's basically like a form of in-game resource then, isn't it?
Yep, exactly, right? So and often like shuffled and hidden. It doesn't even necessarily have to be shuffled, right? If you just choose a certain number and then are able to use that, that can be a very interesting thing that helps portray your army's, tactics, right? That they kind of make them special. What games that I thought that implemented them well, like I don't want to just say, oh, there's a good idea that no one implemented them well. Legion implemented them.
Yep.
So Legion has it. It's each card that you play is both a tactic card. You play it once per turn, and it's both your tactic card and your initiative card. So it's like how you're going to. So the cost of the tactic is also based on your initiative and how many units you can activate out of order, kind of thing. So that's a cool way that they implemented it. It was pretty good, not like much more balanced than the 40k stuff. And then another one that a lot of people really like is Song of Ice and Fire. Tactic cards are integral to that game as well.
Oh, where you have to send other guys to go try and acquire more of them.
I think so. You can acquire more of them. I know you still get some, but you can acquire more, like I believe, using the side table, right? Yep. But they're very integral on actually the tactics of the game and being able to spring things on people and the way that your army is interesting, right? And plays differently is when you play interesting tactics that only your faction has.
Yeah, I keep saying that Song of Ice and Fire feels to me like really close to being a board game, just because of how many like board game elements it has going on. Like resource cards are super board gamey. The sideboard is super board gamey.
The range of archers is super board gamey.
Yeah, it's like you fire 2 spaces basically. It's like okay.
Yeah,
it's basically firing spaces.
Actually, that's true.
It's not even like a it's base. It could have a grid, honestly, in that game, and it'd be the same thing.
Might be better.
It might be better
in terms of gameplay. It might be better. Yeah.
Just embrace the board game. That's what they should have done. I might have been more okay with it that way, but
maybe. And then you have smaller plates.
Yeah, because I hated how the things like gamified locked together in the weird plate-like thing. If they're just like, no, this is a simulation, all the shot distances being weird, all these locking together things being weird. It's like, no, this is a simulation. There's a grid. Don't model the board if you. Man, I want model.
Don't even model the board. It's just literally a cardboard board.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a board game.
Yep,
it's a board game. Yeah, I might enjoy that more, honestly.
Yeah, I might have been more okay with that. Just.
Yeah, they just bait and switch you. It's a good board game, I guess. A lot of people seem to really like it. So.
Yeah, I think that's maybe why I didn't like it. It's like, what I'm really doing here is managing these cards, managing these like sideboard things.
Yeah.
So I guess you have too many.
To be fair, they implemented it well, though. Our game, we have tactic cards now to keep it, based on the things that we didn't like about the other ones. We only have 2 cards, right? No, 3 cards. Sorry. You have 1 that you get to choose basically for a cost, and then 2 that are random, right? And it's only out of 6 cards, or 6 possible tactics. So you do have some hidden information, right? But you also have, some sort of randomness. Your opponent doesn't know quite what you have, and you're not going to just always take the thing that's ideal for you. And you only have those 3 tactics for the entire game, right?
Yep.
But it doesn't. So that also though means that it doesn't. They're effective and they're important, but they don't swing the entire game based on just the cards, right? You don't win or lose just on those tactic cards because there's only 3, right?
So if you go the extent of Song of Ice and Fire, we were trying to constantly bring in cards and bring in cards. That breaks the feel of being a miniature game where you're.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it necessarily does. I think it really depends on the other things, and it also depends on what the cards do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if the cards feel like if they have conditions so that they actually do feel like tactics, right? It's a lot better. But if there's something like, I don't know, reduce a random, I don't know, just choose a unit anywhere on the board and then they get negatives or something like that, that feels very gamey, right? Because you're like, how are you actually targeting the guy in the very, very back corner just as easily as the guy right in front of you, right? Yeah. What is actually happening here, right? So if you can make the cards and the events like have some sort of keep the verisimilitude in mind, I think it can work pretty well to have them, even if the game is hinging on those a lot, right? It's almost combining objectives and events at the same time. It's like you have your objective on the card, you want to, let's say, pincer a guy, and then the card, though, is the thing that helps make it extra powerful. It also has the payoff, right? And so it's kind of a tactic, but also has some sort of refined objectives to make sure that it feels more real. I think it can be really fun and good. I don't know how many games do that. I'm sure there are games that do that. This is a very, very common thing, and it's getting more common, I think, because it's a very fun, interesting way and very an understandable way, right, to put in extra tactics. Like, compare tactic cards in, let's say, Song of Ice and Fire or even Warhammer Apocalypse to the number of what do you call them, stratagems in Warhammer 40k 10th, 9th, 8th, 9th, 10th, right? You had like 30 stratagems. You basically had a deck of stratagems that you could pull off, right? But you could pull them all off at any time.
It was basically just another form of a book. Like, you might as well just have a booklet at that point about how they were being played. Yeah. Like, it didn't...
But if you use cards and randomness, right, you could still have the 30 stratagems, but you could limit the amount of that are happening at one time, right? Because you could say you only have a hand of 6, right?
Yeah, and you're cutting analysis paralysis that way. You're not... Yeah. And you're cutting people being able to, like, comboify if the game's not supposed to just be about comboing, where you can't just pull the perfect sequence of tactics and then do the same thing over and over. It keeps the game varying, too, if you can give people, like, random tactics rather than just the perfect, obvious, like, combo of them. So, yeah.
Yeah. Then you can have it so that when you use your tactic that's super powerful, it's gone, right, because you've used that card, so maybe you won't use the rest of the game. That it has the same kind of benefits that we've been talking about all the way through, right? Yeah. And so I do think that kind of thing can be very helpful. You can also even do the army building at the beginning or the card deck building, right, where you can say, oh, you only can take 10 cards, right, for the game, right? That way you won't, your opponent, if they look at your 10 cards, they don't have to look at all 30 cards and know what all of them do, right?
Yeah.
They'll just see 10 and they're like, okay, these ones can possibly end up coming out during the game.
Yeah, that actually brings me back to something we didn't talk about in the stat card part. Because when you've got a codex or just an army book with all your dudes in it, and your opponent wants to, like, oh, can I know what this unit does? And you don't want to, like, give them a whole lecture on it. You're like, okay, here's my giant book. That's not a great way to tell anybody something. If they want to know something about that one unit, you can just hand them the one card, and they can get a glimpse. They can, like, figure it out just by glimpsing at it, as opposed to having to flip through books in the middle of your game. So that's just true. Sharing info that way about your units is so good.
Yeah, it's just easier to when they ask about one unit, to just pass them over one card.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly. So that's the part I didn't think before. On the note of using, like, resource cards in a poor way, Necromunda is excellent at doing things poorly. They had, like, your different territories as cards. So, I mean, if only one person had the whole deck, it'd be okay. But in reality, you drew them up randomly. Like, you rolled dice to get your territories, so it wasn't based on the deck. So you couldn't even, like, share the cards around, but somehow you were supposed to, like, lose the resource, which is a card, to the other player if they beat you too badly. So it's just what you're supposed to even do with these cards. Like, you're not going to give your card to your opponent during a multi-game campaign and, like, take apart your deck.
You're supposed to. But the other thing is they're random. You roll on a table, so you can technically have
a bunch of the same thing.
6 settlements.
Yeah.
Did they even have 6 of every card?
No. Why were those cards exactly? Like they could have made it
cardboard, man. It's just cardboard you could throw in there.
Yeah, they didn't fit the mechanic to like what cards do, or they didn't fit the game mechanic to cards. They could have made it card based, like we said. You draw, you randomly get your locations, and in theory,
that somewhat makes sense because they're actual locations. So the reason why you can't have 6 settlements is because there's not actually 6 settlements, right, in the area you're fighting over.
Yeah. I don't know what you do then when you take your opponents and your opponent has to like give away the card from their deck and you keeping track of it.
Yeah, you just gotta give it to them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now the deck just changes. You're like, yeah, you have a new deck for your next game, the next campaign if you lose it.
There's so many things that didn't work with Necromunda.
So yeah.
Also, there was like a bajillion cards and you got to choose them.
Oh, the tactics cards. Yeah. You chose your tactics. You just chose them.
You chose them. So everyone, like, unless you are trying to be fun, you just always choose the best tactic cards.
Yeah.
So, like, basically all of the things we thought were good, like, ways to implement it, besides the basic idea, which they did, all of the tweaks that you need to make it actually work, Necromunda did the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, you could have had cards for your units, too. Like instead, there was just army sheet. No, you did. You could print them.
There are cards that you could print out, but that is third party. That was third party. Oh no, I
bought them. I bought them. Yeah, you could fill them out. You could fill out your own cards.
There are cards. There were cards you could fill out.
Yeah.
And there were also actually the base game was actually supposed to be cards, right?
Yeah.
Like the original release that made sense was a 2-player box game. And you just played with those cards filled out, basically. So you had the 2 factions, and it's just supposed to be a box game where these 2 factions fight it out, and you're playing like notable characters in the Necromunda universe. And so the game, my guess, is probably a lot more balanced if you play it that way.
It sounds like a good game, but no.
Yeah, good box game, nice models.
Yeah, what do you think of filling out cards? Because I know in Drop, like Necromunda had that. Drop Fleet, which anyone is watching, and I'm wearing, you would fill out your army list was actually on cards, and it was sort of an activation sequence thing, which is kind of interesting. I haven't seen that too many times. Filling out cards is
there's so many issues with filling out cards. So I don't mind printing cards, but filling out cards, there's like I talked about before, cards are nice, they feel good. You don't want to mark up the card. You're feeling like you're damaging it.
Yeah, because you run out of them and then you can't keep playing.
Exactly. So why would you write on the actual card? It feels terrible. Yes. And you write with dry erase. How is that going to work when you're shuffling them, right? It'll rub off the dry erase, right? So it's fine in War Machine where it's just stat cards.
Yes.
You could put the dry erase, you put it in the sleeve, and then you put the dry erase on the sleeve, right? That works. But when you have things where you're going to be shuffling them, like in Drop Fleet, you're supposed to actually write on the card because if you dry erase, it's just going to get rubbed out when you put the deck. So there's so many things. Even if you're not shuffling them up, it just feels bad to wreck your mint card.
Yeah, it does.
And I'd be more okay with it when you have like printout card size things and you're supposed to put them into a thing, because then the idea is you're constantly printing it out. It's a lot cheaper to print a card out than like buy a new set of thick cardboard, right? So that part I'm okay with when they allow you to print out cards, but the actual I don't know, maybe that's just the collector in me, but the idea of wrecking the cards I don't like.
It's kind of a neat idea, like it's a randomization thing, but like if you think of bolt action, like okay, you randomly go back and forth, the bolt action mechanic of like who activates, you pull the token out of the bag and it's who's activating. But it's kind of neat that if like you could have your guys activate and you're not actually choosing it, which kind of cuts down the analysis paralysis in another way. It's like, well, I'm not choosing who's activating. You draw the card of who they are off like a pile. It could even be your stat cards, and then they activate. I'm sure some game must have done this.
Shatterpoint. So because they have stat cards, and then you kind of put those in. But you each player has their own deck, right? And you alternate drawing your deck, right?
Neat.
Do that. So yeah, that is kind of neat. And then, but I don't know, writing on them, terrible idea. Also, cards are not that big, and shuffleable cards especially cannot be that big. Because if you have a tarot card, then sure, but it's harder to shuffle. But when you're talking about normal size cards, how much can you write on that thing? Not that much.
Yeah, exactly. Like at that point, you just maybe want to have an army list that's separate, and then you just have sequential numbers for which group or which unit number activates.
Just put pieces of paper, put it in a sleeve, and put a piece of paper on the other side, and then write on the piece of paper. That works fine, honestly.
Even like if you have big games like that, they can have cardboard assets with just like this little circle. It's a picture of the thing that's activating, and you reach in, you pull it out, kind of like the bolt action way, except it's got a picture on it. Kind of like a bag full of pogs. If we're going right back to the 90s.
Well, you can do if you're doing bag full of pogs, you can just have nice cards, and you force them to buy a card or have a card when they buy the unit. Yep. And then that goes into your deck, right? You can still do that, right? It becomes more of what we were talking about before, though, right? But you're not going to draw on them. Ugh.
No, I don't like filling out cards. There's something... I'm okay with writing on an army list, but filling out a card, I don't know.
Well, because an army list is printed off. It's cheap. It's disposable. It's quick, right?
Yeah,
if your army list is in the back of your rule book, are you going to write in it?
Yeah, you're going to circle the guys? Like, no, you're not going to start circling guys.
Oftentimes they would have the sheets that you're supposed to photocopy. But, like, in the back of the book, would you write your army list in that book? No. You don't want to wreck the mid thing. You'd rather wreck the book by just using it all the time and having the spine fall out than actually write in the book.
Or even cutting templates out of the back of the book. Like, here's your templates. Yeah. You're like, no, I'm not cutting these out.
No, you're supposed to photocopy them for sure. I wrote my initials on my Frostgrave books because we have a whole bunch of people who brought them. And even that, I felt bad on doing. I wrote it in pencil, and I was like, what am I doing? I defaced it. But I did it anyways.
Should just put a cool bookmark in it.
Yeah, now Les has my book with my initials in it.
It's cool. It's signed by you.
Yeah, exactly. That I have
keep signing all the books. Now everyone's Frostgrave book is signed if they steal yours.
Yeah, it's just all mine. Yeah. All right. I guess, what was the last one, or is that all of them?
Oh, there was resources, and just using them as resources, using them to generate like objectives, either randomly, not randomly, just keeping track of them, the stat cards, and then just like randomizing outcomes that kind of like it draws the outcomes down.
All right. So then we went through all the basics, or at least a whole bunch of different ways that they're generally used. Let's get down to brass tacks. Do you like cards in your games?
Yeah, I actually do. Even though we play Infinity Frostgrave and there's no cards, I still like them. Like, to be fair, in Frostgrave they have the Ulterior Motives deck, and when we're not playing with multiple people, that slows the game down. Because when you have 4 people playing on the same board, it just slows it down. But if you're not, the alternative, like having those cards, is really cool.
Yeah, having that special, there's like 50 unique missions or something like that, or maybe 40 unique missions, and each person chooses one. Like we haven't even, well, generally we play with multiple people, so we aren't using it that much. But those are a lot of different kind of missions to play out. They're very different. They're very unique and flavorful, like with everything in Frostgrave, right? Joe McCullough campaign design is great, right? And those cards definitely keep things interesting. And even if you just had the main rulebook and those cards, you could have a lot of game and a lot of different missions happening because of that.
Yeah, I think it's the best way to play Frostgrave one-on-one. Like, the cards make it the best way. I don't normally like playing Frostgrave one-on-one, but when I do play Frostgrave one-on-one, cards is the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. I really like them. Best. I think they're the first supplement you want to get if you're playing one-on-one. Yeah. I agree. I really like them. I like them in a limited capacity, though. Like, for randomization, I'm vastly prefer dice because of the physicalness of rolling dice. And I think a lot of people like cards because depending on how you use them, like all the different ways we talked about, there's a lot of input randomness. So it's the kind of thing, it's like you get the random pieces, and then you learn how to deal with them. But the output randomness is really, really interesting and fun when you can modify the output randomness, right? So when you're trying to modify things so that the dice rolls are in your favor, right? So that kind of way is, to me, like my favorite part and the most about modeling kind of actual real life, right? And wartime battles or all that kind of stuff. And why I prefer dice over like the cards, you don't have to shuffle, right, to get that full randomness. And it's just fun. The physical weight of a dice, right? When you're rolling it, it just feels good. The action of rolling it as opposed to drawing a card. There's just more fun in rolling the dice than drawing a card.
Yeah. Yeah, for stat cards, I think I'm on the fence, 50-50, whether I like them or not. Because they honestly make a big...
I waffle all the time.
Yeah, they make the big mess all over the board. Like I said, the advantage before, you can show your opponent what the things do, which I guess makes sense in more complicated games. But like assembling them all and just putting them all over the board, 50-50 about whether that's actually like a good thing to do.
Does your board have the space for the cards is the issue, right? When you play a board game, they always put into like the game space that you're playing on the idea that you're going to be laying your cards down, right?
Yeah.
But in war games, oftentimes they're like, yeah, build your army with your cards, but then their table sizes, because they're so big, don't factor into account the fact that you need like, you're playing a 4x4 game, but you need a like
another foot to the side,
3 inch by 4 just to lay out all your cards on the side, right?
You need your dice tray too. You need your,
Yes, exactly. So if you have games that factor in the space you need, I think it can be fine, right? In some ways, it can be very, very helpful just to lay out all your units so that you can see all of them at one time, like all the stats, and it just helps you play, especially at the beginning, help you play faster, right? Being able to see them all laid out there. That's especially something that for our game. The idea of doing it, like it's a skirmish game, so generally it's under 12 units, right? But the idea of being able to see all of those different stats at the same time and what they do is very helpful in playing the game.
Yeah, I just think I like the army. I think I like the army sheet version better, but
that's true. But then you got to put your sheet somewhere. Like when we have army sheets in Infinity, when we play it right at the store. We'll talk about it, and those boards are 4x6 at the store, so it's not as bad. There's some room to put them on the side, but oftentimes during the game, it's just kind of the sheets just get thrown to the side, right? And you almost just talk out what the game is. So there's some sort of complexity level where it makes sense and not, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for my army list, I just use my phone because it's small. You can put it in your pocket when you're not using it. You take it out and look at it. I don't know. There's probably some ideal size for whether cards are good or not.
Yeah, it has to do with games. It has to do with number of miniature size and probably the board size too, like you mentioned.
Yep.
If there's going to be space on your table to put those things.
Yeah. Okay. War Machine was terrible for that, especially since you had to write markers on it.
Yeah, but you would never go into the back end of your deployment zone. You always just smashed into the middle. So the back of the board wasn't even used for anything. True. So whatever.
You could say the reason why it was a 4x4 was just so you could lay all your cards down at the back of the board.
Yeah, like X-Wing, you would drive to the edge of the board sometimes, and your cards were in the way. But
that's true. Yeah, so overall, I guess I do like the intervention of cards or the additional growth of cards into miniature games, and I'm looking forward to that happening in a cleaner way, but I am somewhat worried that we might get an overabundance of cards in certain ways and in certain games. Like, I don't want to play Magic, right? If I wanted to play Magic, I'd play Magic. So as long as the emphasis is on the boards and the table and the verisimilitude of having an actual somewhat realistic simulation of a battle going on, I'm okay with cards adding a little bit of spice.
Yeah. Yeah, what I almost want to see is like a game where you go like and you're grabbing like different objectives from around the board, like clues.
I
and
thought
stuff
you were
like
gonna say
that.
where you're going and putting the cards down and then grabbing them like speed, and that's part of the miniature game.
And dropping them from the sky, and they cause like if they land on something, they cause damage.
Hit the unit, then you pick up the model and throw them off the board.
That was a rule in some edition of some game. Anyway, but yeah, I think it'd be cool if like in the middle of the game you were grabbing stuff and then drawing the cards from what you're finding on the board. It also feels very
Relic
board
Blade.
gamey. Relic Blade does that? Cool.
I think Relic Blade does that. So yeah. So I think there's like treasures and stuff like that, and you can grab special weapons and stuff off the board, which is kind of cool. Kind of like panoplies and stuff.
Yeah. It's just another way
that
of
would
drawing.
be cool.
But with the thing like in Infinity has the panoplies and you roll, and it's just always annoying to keep track of the thing. I know some people have like printed out made tokens for every single outcome so they can like, I have the thing in my hand. Because when you get something from on the board, you want like you kind of want to be physical rather than having like write down in the middle of your miniature game what the thing is.
Actually, that would be really cool and fun. I know Relic Blade does something with that, but we should probably play it actually, and maybe that's the kind of thing I'm talking about right now. But like the idea of like exactly what you're saying, like just a panoply game, right? It's probably you want it to be fantasy or something like that.
Yeah, like the treasure chest opening game, pirates, whatever.
And then each of you put in your like cards, so that like into the possible treasure pool, and you have base treasures, and you're going over and trying to pick them up. And if you pick up, you might pick up the opponent's treasure, and then they're going to try and like hit you over the head and take it. But then they're not as good at using it. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So it doesn't work with them. But sometimes maybe it will if you're running the same things. That would be fun. I don't know. Yeah, we got to try Relic Blade and see if that fits in there.
Are you just like
I'm now talking up Relic Blade.
Are you
I'm
just
like,
giving yourself?
I don't know the rules of Relic Blade, but I'm talking up the game. I'm like, I'm sure that's what the game is. We should definitely play that. I'm sure that's actually what happens in the game.
You're just trying to get justification to buy stuff at Gen Con. This is what's happening, isn't it?
I already bought Relic Blade.
how do I not know?
I haven't bought the rules. The rules weren't there. I was buy them. So maybe I'll come back with some Relic Blade, or I guess this is in the future. So I have come back with Relic Blade, and we will be playing Relic Blade, and we will have a review of Relic Blade sometime in the future.
But you have not opened the box to know how the rules work. Yes, of course.
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah. I don't know if Relic Blade is even going to be there, but I'll somehow bring Relic Blade home.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's Gen Con, not Adepticon, so it's a combination of board games and miniature games, which
it might
fits
be
into
too
our
expensive
topic.
for certain like groups, right? You have to have a certain amount of money because it's so popular now. Like I heard the prices can get kind of crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is our breakdown of cards in games. So if you think we messed up, or you have a game that you want to mention, like we intentionally didn't mention some games that have some pretty awesome card mechanics, so that you guys can tell us about them. So why don't you go and tell us what games with cards that we didn't mention that are really awesome. You can email us them at contact@diceovereverything.com.
Yeah, or let us know on Facebook. We're Dice Over Everything.
This has been Alan.
Bye. This has been Brandon.